Hey everybody, this is Kathleen Moss, and you're listening to A Breast Cancer Diary. Today is the 20th episode of A Breast Cancer Diary, the podcast, and I'm pretty happy with my first season. This will be the final episode for this season, and today I'm biting off a lot, reflecting on last week's interview with my friend Leslie Pfeiffer-Pien. We talked about metastatic breast cancer, we talked about advocacy, and we talked a lot about ILC, or invasive lobular breast cancer, which is the type of breast cancer, subtype of breast cancer that both Leslie and I were diagnosed with. I'm going to take the holidays off and then come back in the new year, so I will be interviewing folks over the holidays, of course, and getting a little head start for the new year. But if any of you listeners would like to be interviewed, I would love to tell your story. If you feel like you relate to the podcast, then you may be a good person to be interviewed for it. So next season, I'm going to be focusing on folks that I don't know as well, maybe some strangers, some medical professionals perhaps. But for today, I want to cover those three topics that Leslie and I talked about lightly last week in her interview. Firstly, I want to talk about metastatic breast cancer. And I want to review kind of my reason for doing this podcast is so that folks don't feel alone in their breast cancer journey, certainly. But I think my highest aim is that I would be able to coach future advocates coming out of the patient space and into the advocacy space in the breast cancer community, because I feel that we need so many more patient advocates. And a patient advocate is just a patient who becomes an advocate, if you wonder what that means. There are lots of ways to become an advocate. You can get involved in the research community, you can get involved in the political space and work on different proposals and bills in Congress and with your representatives in Washington, D.C. You can do practical policy building in your local hospital or clinic. You can do awareness raising and education in your local hospital and clinic and with patients. So there are so many different niches and so many different directions to go with advocacy. And I don't expect that listeners will become major full-time advocates the way that I have become. But I certainly would love for you to become an advocate in your own small way. And so a lot of these reflection post-interview episodes are really just to prepare you for that kind of work, in confidence that you will find your way there, as Leslie described finding her way after 7 years, jumping in when she felt ready. And so I'm defining these terms for your sake so that you can become a really amazing advocate and so that you won't be frightened by them in the advocate space, but also so that you're not frightened to talk to other breast cancer survivors who maybe are in a later stage than you. Like myself, I was pretty intimidated to talk to metastatic survivors because I didn't know any of the lingo or what they were going through or how scary it really was. And that's why I want to have metastatic survivors or thrivers on the podcast to tell their story, just so that we all can become more familiar with the patterns that they face and the good points of their stories. They definitely have bright spots, big bright spots, as Leslie was a really great testament to. But just to go over some terms about metastatic breast cancer that we used, we talked about the term lines of treatment, and that's a term that's used in the medical community when you have been given a treatment for a period of time and it works or it doesn't work, and then you need another one. So you have a first line of treatment, and then you have your second line of treatment, and third and fourth, and so on. That is pretty typical for a metastatic patient to have more than one kind of treatment and consecutive ones. Sometimes one will go on for a while and then their cancer will be dormant or indolent for a while and they won't need any treatment, and then they will need treatment again when their cancer progresses and starts to pick up and be active again. So that's a pretty kind of intuitive one. The other one is a term called progression or active progression. These are terms that are used to describe a cancer going from either dormant or indolent, slow growing, to more active and fast growing. And progression is just that phrase that's the common phrase that we use to say that something has happened, the cancer's kicked back into gear again, and it's growing again. It's usually really bad news. It's not fun to make that announcement among your friends in the cancer community, and people are pretty bummed out by that news, but really important to be able to console folks and just be there for them when they're experiencing it. I did define the term de novo, which is a Latin term that means from the start, so that you had this type of severe metastatic cancer from the start and didn't go through a possible cure, which we never know whether surgery or chemo or radiation has provided a cure until later on in life or until we die. Really, we don't know whether we were cured by those first initial attempts if we've had early disease. But for metastatic disease, you can get it from the start or you can get it later on as a recurrence. And so de novo just means that you had it the very first time that you learned that you had cancer. You already had the type that is incurable. Incurable does not mean that you can't live 20 years with it, though. It's not a fast, it's not like pancreatic cancer where you're expected to die really fast. Breast cancer has a lot of possibilities in the metastatic realm. And so de novo doesn't mean a literal death sentence. It can mean a much different but long life still. And then those terms dormant, indolent versus active. Dormant just means sleeping. I think it's also Latin in its root. Indolent means very slow growing, kind of sluggish. And then active, of course, means faster growing. And then there's a term, I think I covered the term NED earlier in the podcast series. NED means no evidence of disease. So you may have been cured, you may not have been cured when you use the word NED, no evidence of disease. And for the metastatic community, they use NEAD, so no evidence of active disease. And that would describe a more dormant metastatic state. So instead of saying we're NED, we are NEAD in the metastatic community when things have slowed down and there's no active progression. So those are the basic definitions that I wanted to cover about metastatic cancer. Every metastatic story is very different, and so I don't want to generalize and say that Leslie's is typical. It isn't at all. There are very many different kinds of metastatic stories. Some women will have, no progression for years and years and years, and some will have more and more progression and different kinds of progression in different places and many lines of treatment. So you really need to listen and hear lots of stories to understand the different ways that metastatic disease can go and can take you. And so Leslie's is just one, and I hope to tell many more. And if you are listening and you have metastatic disease and you're willing to come on the podcast, I would love to have you. Even though if you're angry or sad or teary, I don't mind any of those emotions. I think that they're great and very appropriate in this setting. So I'd love to have you for that. So I want to move on and talk a little bit about lobular breast cancer. This is a subtype of breast cancer, and the word lobular is probably pretty temporary. This is the initial name that was given under the misunderstanding that lobular cancer grows only in the lobules and not in the ducts. Recently, it was discovered that lobular cancer can grow in the ducts and ductal cancer can grow in the lobules. So there's a new term for ductal cancer, which is no specific type, NST. And this is only being used in the research community and only among those who are differentiating between ductal and lobular, which is very rare still in the research community. So pretty infantile announcement, not something that even all researchers are aware of, or certainly not using the term yet. And so since ductal is being renamed as no specific type, lobular will probably also be renamed, but it hasn't been renamed yet. So it's just one in a million confusing things about lobular breast cancer. Lobular breast cancer, very much like triple negative, is kind of 15% of the overall breast cancer population. But 15% is quite large in the big scheme of things because you realize that lobular cancer has an even larger population of patients than ovarian cancer. So if that puts it into perspective, it still is warranting quite a lot of research and attention in the research community, and yet it has not been given individual attention very much at all until the last 5 or 10 years. And right now it is being given attention in certain labs in particular. There are a couple of areas in the United States where it's being researched more. Pennsylvania, Texas, Houston, Texas, at MD Anderson is being focused on quite a bit. And at Socorro Labs at the University of Colorado, they're focusing on it quite a bit. So mostly in university settings, but also private labs are studying lobular, and then that's just in the US. And then in Europe, there are quite a few really passionate individual researchers and labs that are working hard on lobular research as well. So it's a really exciting time to join the advocacy space in the lobular breast cancer community, because we're seeing movement for the first time in forever. And we're learning that lobular breast cancer is very distinct from ductal, or no specific type, the other type of breast cancer, subtype, major subtype. So all breast cancer patients fit into one of these silos, either lobular or ductal. And then within those silos, you can have triple negative or various combinations of ER/PR positive, HER2 positive, or negative. So it's still true of lobular patients that they need to have the triple marker designations. We're not missing that element. It's kind of the same in that respect. But the main characteristic of lobular is that it lacks a glue, kind of a glue that sticks cancer cells together. It's called E-cadherin. And you're either missing that because of something you were born without, a mutation that you were born with, or you're missing that because you developed a mutation just in the development of your individual cancer. And so it doesn't really matter. You don't really need to know that. But E-cadherin makes it so that there's no clumping of cancer cells. And so the cancer cells do is they string out in a long line, and because of that, they're very hard to see. A lump of cancer cells is really easy to see in an MRI or an ultrasound, and in some cases a mammogram even. But a long string of single cells in single file is really hard to see. It's microscopic. So because of that, a lot of lobular patients aren't diagnosed until they're late stage, like Leslie. And a lot of us that are diagnosed early stage, like myself, are diagnosed by accident because of some other surgical exploration. In many cases, it's because of DCIS. And so it's one good reason to keep doing surgery for DCIS patients is because sometimes they do have lobular that's hiding out that nobody would have known about, as in my own story. But the scary thing about lobular is that we don't see it in screening or surveillance scans very well. And so even once you've had lobular, it's really hard, unless you take all the tissue out, it's really hard to see where it's been and where it's going. And so a lot of folks that have done the research, like myself, who've had lobular, do go back and get more breast tissue removed in the end, just out of insecurity and anxiety. Not everyone, and certainly not necessary to do so. You can still hope that they will catch it before it's lethal, technically, but I think a lot of us just don't want to wait and see. And so we talked about Leslie's dilemma of whether or not she would ever want to have her breast tissue removed. When you are diagnosed de novo and you've already had cancer cells spreading throughout your body, as Leslie did in the beginning, there's no need to remove the tissue. You're going to treat it with drugs anyway, so there's no need to surgically remove it. There's already an assumption that it's going to be there to some extent. It's already traveled through your bloodstream and is active elsewhere in your body that maybe can't be reached with the surgery. And so the idea and the standing practice right now is that you don't need to remove that breast tissue. You just need to keep treating it unless it becomes indolent or inactive. But the frustrating thing about ILC is, even in Leslie's case, and she mentioned this in breast cancer support groups that she might go to, she will hear people talking about not catching something. And we talked about FES PET. FES PET is a new technology that is a much better PET scan for ILC patients because it can see the estrogen avid cancers, not just the glucose avid cancers. So not just cancers that are thriving on glucose, but the ones that are thriving on estrogen. And it can see a little deeper into the body, so it can see into the bones and different places that a regular PET scan can't see. And so there's some new technologies that are being developed to make scans a little more effective for us lobular patients so that we can see what's really going on in there. Now, I recently had another colleague and fellow advocate that was not able to see a progression because she had lobular. And she went to the ILC conference over in Leuven, Belgium this September. While she was over there, Leuven has a special preference for doing a certain kind of MRI that's pretty new. It's called diffusion-weighted whole-body MRI. And they use that as kind of the standard of care for lobular patients over in Belgium. And this friend of mine has gotten scans when she was over there and discovered a new progression that she was not aware of and would not have been aware of if she hadn't done that. So we have a lot of new possibilities for tracking and scanning and surveilling our cancers in the lobular community, but they're not affordable yet. We can get diffusion-weighted MRI scans here in the U.S. There are private clinics that do them. They're growing all the time. There's I think maybe 8 or 10 of them in the U.S. right now. But they cost $1,000 per pop. So if you wanted to do one of these every year to try to track your metastatic lobular, you're going to spend a lot of money out of pocket because insurance won't pay for this at this point, at least in the U.S. Over in Belgium, it's probably somewhat covered by the government healthcare system, I imagine, so it may be a little cheaper over there. And I do know more than a couple people that do go to Belgium regularly for that because they are lobular survivors. So much more to be learned and seen in the research every year on this, and this is why I'm planning on going to the symposium down in San Antonio again next month in December, and probably will go every year from now on. It's the biggest global gathering of breast cancer researchers, and it's where all the new research is announced, kind of the breaking news in the media every year. And so it's a pretty exciting place to go and to learn, and there are just way more opportunities to learn than you ever could take advantage of while you're there. There are multiple overlapping seminars and talks and poster sessions and chances to talk to the actual scientists doing the actual science minute by minute, like every 10 minutes you could talk to a different scientist. So it's a really fun and exciting place to go if you are a learner and interested in research, even at a lay level, even as a lay advocate or a patient advocate. And there are hundreds of patient advocates that go every year. They do have a charge. It's not free anymore to go as a patient advocate. It costs $75, which is not much. And there still are some Airbnbs, according to my research. I couldn't find any affordable hotels at this point because people are coming from all over the world to this conference. But there were still some good Airbnb options. So if you want to join me down there, it's December 10th through the 13th, I think, this year, and is always in San Antonio, at least at this point. It may change locations sometime in the future, but really, really good place to go and learn and talk to scientists if you're interested, just to ask questions and broaden your knowledge about breast cancer in general. Another thing that came out of Leslie's story that I wanted to touch on really quick is the importance of getting second opinions, and then also the importance of getting periodic changes in insight in your case, especially with metastatic breast cancer. You're going back to your oncologist all the time when you're metastatic. You're in pretty good touch with them. But if Leslie's first oncologist hadn't moved to another country, she would have never been challenged to get a new oncologist, and she would not have learned all the new things that she's learned from her new practitioner. And so her story just gives a really good example of not being poorly served by anyone, but just having that switch and that change up in oncologists and it being just right for what she needed when she was dealing with that new mutation that she had to face. She needed a little bit more sophisticated service from her medical provider once she was dealing with a more sophisticated condition and mutation, and she got it at just the right time. So I love that part of her story, and I think it's really good to remember that any of us who are having ongoing surveillance or have metastatic breast cancer, it might be good to just try, and nobody's going to take it personally if you go and get a second opinion, even after you've been with the same oncologist for years. It seems like a really good practice to me, and I feel grateful for that example. So that's pretty much what I wanted to talk about today. I wanted to give a little bit of a preview for next season. I mentioned some of the things that I want to focus on next season, but I would really love to secure interviews with some of the folks that helped my mom and I the most in our breast cancer medical experiences. I've had some really frustrating practitioners, and I won't be inviting them on the podcast, but I had some really amazing ones too, and I hope to find ways to connect with them and get them on. Even somebody like my physical therapist, who was my kind of constant support and the person that had the most time to chat with me and was the most open to new ideas and maybe alternative ideas that I was coming up with or being exposed to. So I'd love to have those people on. I also want to have some scientists on that have studied integrative oncology or lifestyle oncology, especially in the area of exercise. And so that's a huge goal of mine. So if you have anyone in your circle that is specialized in that, send them my way or send me their information, and I would love to have them on. Even people who are patients themselves or survivors themselves that have started nonprofits in the realm of exercise, especially for those who are not natural athletes or people who aren't drawn to being in the gym all the time. I feel really drawn to creating spaces for folks like myself who are not naturally inclined to be exercising and are more sedentary by nature, and finding ways for us to make exercise work on a daily basis for us, for the sake of lowering our risk of recurrence. So that'll be a real focus, I think, probably for the rest of every season from now on. I don't think the whole podcast is going to shift in that direction. I think we'll still focus on personal stories, but personal stories about the ways that we've improved our lives through creative solutions to these kinds of lifestyle challenges, maybe a little bit more normative for the podcast. So again, please reach out. Let me know what you think of this first season. The best way you can let me know is by leaving a rating and review. And if you'd like to be entered into a drawing for prizes, then you can also send me a screenshot of that rating and review. And my email address is kathleenmoss@protonmail.com if you'd like to do that. And otherwise, I will aim to see you right around the first of the new year in 2025, unless I see you down in San Antonio in December, about a month from now, which would be delightful too. I will be in the Advocate Lounge along with all the other advocates, and I'll be eating breakfast there every day, so you can catch me in the breakfast line, and I look forward to seeing some of you there. In the meantime, have a wonderful holiday season, and I'll see you in the new year. Bye-bye.